BallIsLife.com here with longtime Hoop Scoop editor and publisher Clark Francis. He's been in the grassroots business since 1983. Appreciate Clark being with us today. We're here to talk a little bit about the state of the high school and grassroots game and some of the major happenings, major things, topics we want to discuss. First thing we want to talk about is high school game and the grassroots game. Talk about the major things pressing on our minds. So let's open up with performance and production. That's one. Then we'll talk about what we think of lack of true lead guards, and we'll talk about the entitlement culture of the game and how that came to be. So talk a little bit about performance and production in terms of player rankings, what you look for, and why you think sometimes potential is a little overstated compared to production.
I think you got to be really good right now to be one of the elite players in the country, to be in my top 10, 15, 20. You got to produce, and I think too many people in our business are rating guys based on size, athleticism, and potential, and they don't really look at what the player is accomplishing night in and night out. And I think that's really important. Most great players have one of three things: size, athleticism, outside shooting, and then the fourth thing that really separates the good players and the great players is, how hard do you play?
Correct.
And again, it's really hard to find anybody in any sport. Shaquille O'Neal might be the classic example because he's such a freak of nature in terms of his size, but most players to achieve really the top level of greatness, they work their tail off to get there in any sport. And if they don't, there's a reason why, like a Shaquille O'Neal situation.
Makes sense. Obviously, Shaquille O'Neal, 80% of what he is at his peak is still a very good player. So that's a good point. I think the guy that you bring up, and we talked about him when he was in high school, me and you were evaluating him at the Nike camp, I believe, in 05. And you said, we're talking about Kevin Durant and Greg Oden, and obviously Greg Oden got hurt, but at the time you said, well, Ronnie, what do you think about Kevin Durant? And I just said, man, he's the second best player in this class. I think he'd be really good. And you're like, well, I think he could be one of the greatest players ever. And me just being at the time, I said, well, Clark, that's a big statement. He's obviously very good, but why? And you mentioned because he's always working. He's the first guy in, last guy out. So why don't you talk a little bit about that and that how it separates? He already has the skill level, but to take it to the next level, he actually has that love and work ethic.
There's no question. Again, when you're 6'10", you're a freak athlete, you shoot the lights out, and you're the hardest working guy anybody's ever been around. They don't make people like that. Michael Jordan had size for his position, could shoot the heck out of it, was a freak athlete, became a great three-point shooter. Wasn't early on necessarily, but he did hit the game-winning shot in 1982 in New Orleans against Georgetown, so that was pretty impressive. But again, if you've got not just all four of those things, but if you've got, let's say you're a big guy and you don't necessarily shoot the ball that well, but you have those other intangibles, then suddenly pay attention, because that guy can go a long way. And again, I at the time said with Kevin Durant, it wasn't a case of knocking Greg Oden, it was just he had all those ingredients that you look for.
Makes sense with that comparison there. I like to talk about the statistics a little bit of, obviously, Greg is about 7 foot, Kevin Durant is 6'10". Kevin would probably still be a good player at 6'7". But talk a little bit to tell people, to give them some perspective, the fans and parents and coaches out there, how many people in America are really 6'10"? Evan,
not that many. So actually, it's a great statistic. Out of 100 million people in the United States, 100 million adult men, let's call it, there are 3,200 that are 6'10" or bigger. So if you're 7 feet, you're a freak of nature. And just even here, there's a couple of people that are 6'10", 6'11", 7 feet, and I mean, they just totally stick out. It's just what it is. But again, and that's one of my pet peeves in basketball. Big guys who want to, all the big guys want to be perimeter players now, and all the perimeter players want to be point guards. And one of my things is, you obviously want to expand your game and be as versatile as possible and be as athletic as possible in basketball. However, know what you do best and take advantage of it, and whatever your bread and butter is should be what you do a lot of the time. And again, the two hardest things to get back in basketball are that speed, quickness, and athleticism. Once you bulk up, too many guys bulk up for football or start playing with weights, and they get bigger and stronger, and they lose that athleticism, that speed, and then also the other thing that players lose and never get back is confidence. And if you have a player that does get those things back, that does lose those things, then you got something, because he's going to work really hard to get in. I give those guys extra points.
Thank you for the input there on the production versus potential. And let's move on to the next topic. You talked a little bit about it, the big men wannabe guards, and the guards, it's hard to find a true leader, true point guard. Talk a little bit about that. What's the next topic we want to talk about is the lack of a true lead guard. We have these, scoring guards, and obviously the game has changed. It's a guard-dominated game. Has changed in the last 10, 15 years. Talk a little bit about that, and first talk about the phenomenon, and then talk about what you would like to see, and give some advice to young players on how you could become a good point guard.
It's changed because players are bigger, stronger, faster, more athletic, and they want to be able to create mismatches and post smaller guys up. But from the standpoint of if you have a small, it doesn't have to be small. If you have a pure point guard, somebody who has an understanding of the game, a facilitator, not a scorer, somebody who's a pass first, make people better. That guy, and again, a high basketball IQ. That guy's going to make everybody else better. If you have weaknesses on your team, he's going to be able to compensate for that weaknesses and make you a lot better. If you have great players, having a pure point guard, having a facilitator isn't quite as important. And again, the guy who can do both, the guy who take what they give you, the guy who understands, has the basketball IQ, knows when to take, to go out and step up and score a lot of points, or when to just sit back and make everybody else better. That's an art to itself, and that's like coaching the floor. I mean, and again, that's one of the rare commodities in basketball now. And again, I look at the junior class, and I was writing about this last week. The one player in the class of the top 50 players in the country, and there are about 10 point guards in that class, is Matt Coleman, who plays at Oak Hill. And there are 3 or 4 guys in that group that are basically, they have scorer's mentality. Sure. They're gunslingers. We're watching one of them right now, and Marcus Howard, who I have 9th in the country, which is probably really high, and athletically he's probably doesn't quite fit that criteria. But sure. He last summer, every time I see him play, he just goes out and puts up numbers, and that's a valuable commodity. So, and that's the next question: are we ranking players for what they do now? Are we ranking players for what they are going to be in college, or what they're going to be in the NBA? And I think it's a combination of all 3. And bottom line, I think it's a beauty contest in terms of which girl do you want to go out with. You have 4 or 5 choices. That's what rating basketball players is as well. It's like, which player would you rather have?
Understood. That's a good example. You mentioned Marcus Howard. He's playing for Finley Prep here at the Tarkanian, and we saw him 3 or 4 times hit game winners. For the Las Vegas prospects, just big time player. Like you say, he doesn't pass the runway test, doesn't pass the beauty pageant test, but he's a good player. You talked a little bit about Matt Coleman of Oak Hill. Obviously, they lost Harry Giles, and somebody's happened to step up, and they are doing very well still, and they're still one of the top 5 ranked teams in the Fab 50. So when you talk about that, I go to the NBA level to skip up 2 steps, and that's my pet peeve with the NBA. I don't watch as much NBA as I did before. The players don't seem to be having as much fun. They lack leadership. They're just out there, going through the motions at times. When you look at a team, the best team in basketball right now, the Golden State Warriors, they only have 1 loss after 30 games. They just look like they're having so much fun. And they have a leadership. They have a pecking order. Sometimes teams are very talented and they lack that. So do you think it starts from the younger ages and then it kind of perpetuates up?
There's no question. The entitlement society that we live in transcends to everything, including basketball. And every kid out there thinks he's going to be the next LeBron James, and the parents are even worse. And by about middle school, they've started to figure it out. Sure. But again, still, a lot of the kids here, they think that, freshmen, sophomores in high school, they think Duke and Kentucky and Carolina are going to recruit them, and it's going to end up being Northern Arizona and mid-level schools that end up recruiting them. Some kids aren't even going to go to Division I. Good rule of thumb: the schools that are recruiting you by about the middle of your junior year, not sending your letters. Letters mean you made the mailing list. Sure. The schools that are actually showing interest in you, coming to watch you play, making phone calls. That's probably the level you can play at. And again, if you're a borderline Division I player versus a Division II player, you're almost better off a lot of times going Division II, because if you do it early, you can line up the financial aid, you can get everything you want. If you wait until the spring, it's not there, and then you're going to prep school, and then it's 18 months later, and you're in the same boat. Maybe you got the scholarship Division I, maybe you didn't.
Correct. It's a big gamble there. I understand what you're saying about doing your homework, playing at the level you can. In middle school, kids all think they're going to get recruited by Carolina, Duke, and you talk a little bit about the entitlement culture. We see it. What advice can you give the kids and to parents out there? Because like you said, everybody's parent thinks that maybe it's harder for them to give a their own evaluation of their kid that is actually legitimate. So what advice would you give to parents and kids out there about that?
If you're good enough, they're going to find you. And playing in all these things is nice, but really what's more important is getting better and continuing to get better and being quicker, faster. The agility. This is not a, basketball strength is a factor in the game, but it's not as important as the athleticism and the quickness and again, being able to do a lot of different things. And in other sports are much more specialized. In basketball, you have to be able to do an awful lot of things. And again, the big guy who can step out, the face-up four-man, the multi-dimensional athletic, guy who can play 2 or 3 positions. That guy's worth a whole lot. In the NBA, that's the criteria that most players fit into. And if you don't fit in, if you're not multi-dimensional, if you can't play several positions and do a lot of different things and have a lot of athleticism as well, you're a specialist. You're one of the best shooters out there. You can knock down 3-pointers like most people shoot free throws, or better than most people can shoot free throws. Or you're a great defender, or you're a great rebounder. There's a reason you're there.
Correct. I think that's the main thing about the NBA that people don't know. There's only 5 or 6 legitimate superstars. You have Curry, you have LeBron James, Durant. Most people have to realize that when you play basketball at the highest level, you're going to be a role player. Even though you're making a lot of money, you have to find a role and you got to fulfill it. I always talk about guys who like Bo Outlaw. I bring up that name. He's an old Los Angeles Clipper. Seen him play a few times pickup, and he's just a monster in pickup. I mean, you wouldn't believe how big and strong and how good he is, but in the NBA, he had a role. He was a rebounder and he was a tough guy. So I think that's a good point you mentioned, that you have to find your role. And in closing, let's talk a little bit about the state of the game in terms of college. What is the trending or phenomenon or topic you want to talk about in college specifically? We talked about high school. We talked about the point guards or lack of them. We talked about the entitlement. What do you like to talk about in college?
Well, I think it's a fascinating trend, and it's what people talk about all the time in our business. And coaching rumors, people want to know what's going on. But I think it's really interesting. You have Bo Ryan, everybody knows is already going to retire, and John Beilein and Jim Boeheim and Roy Williams at North Carolina, Mike Krzyzewski, Jim Larinaga, Leonard Hamilton at at Florida State is like 67, 68 years old. At some point, he's not going to last forever. Bobby Huggins is at some point is going to, and Tom Izzo is behind that curve, but he's probably go 7, 8, 9 more years. I don't know quite how Tom Izzo is. I know that John Calipari is 56, so he's expected to see in the games probably 10 years. So who's the next generation of great up-and-coming coaches? Sean Miller obviously fits that category. You've also got Tony Bennett at Virginia. You've got a couple pro guys who could come back to college. Mark Stevens with the Celtics and Billy Donovan would be a great hire. And but again, after that, Mark Turgeon at Maryland has recruited well and is kind of on the cusp, but he's probably a Final 4 or Final 8 away from being that level. Who's the next generation of great coaches? Shaka Smart, people who's here today. People mention him, but he really needs to win at Texas before he's going to get a Kentucky or a Louisville or a North Carolina or an NC State. I forgot to mention Rick Pitino. I mean, he's early 60s as well. And what really makes it even more fascinating is the bright up-and-coming guys that everybody pegged 3, 4, 5 years ago. They've all busted. And
it's tough business.
And I'll give you a great example. Tom Crean, if he wins the national championship a couple years ago, had the best team with Zeller at Indiana. Suddenly, he can name whatever job he wants. Now he's taking heat. He's got to win games this year, and it's just the nature of the beast. But it's really going to be interesting because if Pitino doesn't go well for Pitino at Louisville, he could retire in a year or two if he. As long as it's fun for him, I think he'll continue to coach. Roy Williams, I think, has health problems. People have told me in Carolina they speculate he could retire at the end of this year. Obviously, Bo Ryan. But all these guys are going to be out in 3, 4, 5 years. And again, this is going to accomplish. Let's say John Calipari goes to the NBA. Who gets Kentucky? I mean, there's a lot of questions, and that's one of the great things about sports is the speculation on who's going to get what jobs or what team is going to sign what players or. That's what makes it fun, and I think that's a fascinating situation, and I haven't heard a lot of people talk about it.
Sure, yeah, and I think you mentioned that, and there's no answer, so it's something that's out there. It's going to stay out there, so it's something that the fans could chatter about, something that people can speculate. So we appreciate that.
Forgot to mention Archie Miller at Dayton, but does Dayton get one of those elite jobs? Sean Miller's brother. been to the Final Eight, but that's another thing. To do it once is it the players, and 3 or 4 years later you come back and do it again, and you have a great team, and it kind of perpetuates itself. But again, I think it's a fascinating subject.
Appreciate it, Clark. Appreciate your time, and it is a great subject. There's obviously no answer. We could sit here all day and talk about it, but appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on with us.
Thank you.